Good morning. Call the Executive Committee meeting Tuesday, January 23rd to order. Can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Tripp, Mr. Washington,
Present.
Mr. Legess, Mr. Vickery, Mr. Olchoff, Mr. Hess, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Scott, Mr. Snipes, Mr. Byrne,
Present.
Mr. Seroy, Ms. Weber, Mr. Lear, Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Any public comment today? Don't have anything up here. Going to presentations, none today. Approval of the minutes. December 26, 2017. Got a motion to approve. Mr. Byrne, Mr. McConnell, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Health Department, Legislative, Mr. Lear. Sorry, skipped ahead a little bit. What do you got for us today, Steve? Hold on just a second here.
The UCCI meeting yesterday, we had a report in terms of some of the general conditions in regard to the legislature. They were scheduled to meet this week, but that got canceled. They're dealing with some healthcare legislation that's still been going on for a long time. One of the things that at a kind of conceptual level is going on is bills in terms of government streamlining. It appears that that will be one focus of the governor, consolidation, government streamlining. But most of the legislation, if not all of it, is permissive legislation. So it would permit looking into those kind of changes in government structure. How far even that legislation is going to go is unclear. As was reported, because this is an election year, there's going to be a lot of legislation introduced so that members of the Assembly can indicate that they are representing interests of their constituents, but the feeling that was reported was that there's probably not going to be a lot of action. One of the typical kinds of legislation that is going to be introduced, legislation that prohibits paying any public employee from going to a convention. There's some kind of a personal, maybe not personal issue, I should say, but a specific issue that came out of Kane County. So a legislator representing part of Kane County has put this in. The likelihood it's going to go anywhere is pretty small, but those are the kind of things that you may be reading about as the General Assembly is in session. In regard to the budget, the feeling was that current programs are probably okay, but there's really no real suggestions in terms of what to do about the pension deficit situation in terms of the pensions that are supported by the state government. So we also had a workshop on sexual harassment, 2 PowerPoints. If any members of the board wish to see copies of the printed version of those PowerPoints, well, I'd be glad to share those. That's about all I have.
Wonderful. Any questions for Mr. Lear? All right. Moving on then, no appointments. Information services, Mr. Duval. Do you have anything for us?
Whoa. I got a camera?
There.
You help me.
Okay, I'd like to give you an update of our schedule for the refreshing of the computers. I believe I discussed it last month that for the next year and a half, we were going to do an update, a refreshing the computers throughout the county network. That would be both the administrative side and the court side, which includes the annex. This doesn't address the sheriff. They're on their own budget. They will do whatever they do. They usually will work something out with me. We operate differently than we did the last time we did this, so I'll have to talk to Trent, find out what their expectation is. But I'm talking mostly about the departments that I service for. Okay. What we plan on beginning is this month. And as far as this building goes, this is the first one I'll address, is we're gonna go by floor. And as far as 189 East Court, or the admin building, the 6th floor is already covered. That was covered when the SAO, or the State's Attorney's Office, did their refresh last year, which included all of their PCs. They paid for their own, out of their own funding. I'm not sure where the funding was. I think it was a combination of recovered funds or grants or whatever. Regardless, we didn't have to pay for it out of my department. I don't believe they put in the general fund request.
I don't think so.
So the 6th floor is covered. The next floor is the 5th floor, obviously. And the first one we're going to address, and I've already discussed that with, is Diane. She's having some issues with her computer, so we're going to address that. We hope to have that addressed in the next week or so. We don't need to do the chairman's because we addressed him last year, so he's up to date. And then what we'll do, as the budget allows, we will crawl down or walk down the floor and gradually replace each machine, and then we'll go down each subsequent floor as the budget allows. What I won't do is jump and do them all at once, because our budget's really a repair budget. It's meant to first deal with anything that could go possibly wrong in the year based on historical trends. What I'm trying to do is not come back to you and request additional funds, so I'm trying to work it around using those same funds. And hopefully in a year and a half, we haven't had to go outside the budget to do what we need to do to meet the Microsoft guidelines for being secure and to make sure all the rest of our software works. What we're doing is a combination of new machines. I would be purchasing officially refurbished ones, which there's a standard when you do that. Well, those can be half the price, and they'll meet what we need to do. Or in some cases, if the machines we have already here will service, what I'll do is wipe them clean and reapply what we need to have. That way we can dramatically bring down the costs, and that's how I'm hoping to work inside the budget that we have without coming back. If I did have to come back, it should be a nominal amount that we would have to do. I would doubt it would be for the hardware. At most, it would be having to address the office suite that the individual offices have to use to operate their daily function. The next one is the courthouse. Again, the State's Attorney's Office is already completely covered, so that's 30-something PCs we don't have to worry about, and they paid for that. We've begun replacing part of the judges. We've already done one of the judges completely, both their chambers and their courtroom. And we also implemented the e-filer system that you've heard them talk about. I made the purchases for them, but they paid for it. We installed it. We installed the scanners, the firewall. They're operating on a separate network that we created for that. So when the public comes to use those e-filers, they go straight out to the state system or court system. And then the circuit clerks people have designated people who go into the court system from the other end, review them, and that's how that process basically works. What we will begin for updating, and I've talked to this with Sandy, or the circuit clerk, is we will start their upgrade with those people who are servicing those new e-filer orders, whether they're there or in the general public. And then we will gradually work it out in their office. That, by the time we do that, that would cover all the PCs, excluding the sheriff's PCs in that building. Again, I don't have to pay for that. That's not a general fund request. That comes out of the courts and circuit clerks' 2 computer funds. They're specifically designated for these type of projects, and talking to the chairman and finance, they're not being borrowed again, so they're reserved specifically to handle this. So we're going to start addressing that probably next month or so, and we'll do a few at a time. There's no sense to bulk order because there's only 2 of us. We can only put out so many at a time, but we'll have them done by this timeline. The next one would be the building that we need to address is the annex building. That is currently, I believe, specifically housed by the probation department and the public defender. The probation department pays for their own PC, their PC refresh and their servers out of their own funds. We had planned on starting that now or next month, but I believe they have an agreement with the chairman and the finance department to put that off to the summer because I believe as an entity, we do use those funds to borrow and pay back. And that actually helps us because we can only do so many PCs at a time. I was in no rush to start that, but we will start their refresh in the summer and hope to be done with that complete department by the end of the year based on whether or not funds are available and that town wants to keep going forward with that. The remaining department in that building would be the public defender. We'll have to discuss that, who's going to pay for that. That's gone over the years. I've been here 2 different ways. At one time, I paid for some of them, but traditionally it came from the judge's money. When I did it, it was because they had lagged behind. Nobody was doing anything. So I took existing machines I had, updated them, and gave them to them to make sure that they weren't lagging behind the remaining offices. And it really hurts me as a department if 60% of our calls are to a department because their hardware not coming. That doesn't help me at all. So we'll have to discuss that, but regardless, we don't need to start, since that department's not that large, we'll wait to 2019 to even look at that. Again, there's not that many people there, so that shouldn't be that big of a deal. We'll just need to discuss who's going to pay for those. Maybe the computer funds will pay for that. That's not my call. That'll be a decision between, I believe, the chairman, the judge, and the circuit clerk. Is that who's in charge? I don't know. I guess it's not that relevant.
No, I think it's judges.
The judges?
Yeah.
Okay. And hopefully by that time, by January 1, 2020, we will have all machines that have been refreshed, updated, operating Windows 10, which allows us to know that the software that we are running, which is the antivirus, the anti-spam, and all that, is running how it's intended. It has to be on Microsoft's certified non-end-of-life operating systems, and Windows 7 goes out by January 1. So that's our long-term project. In between that, we do our normal servicing, which is every day, fix printers, replace printers, internet called or whatever. So that's our long-term plan. I discussed it in January, but I just talked about it briefly. That's more of a layout what we plan on doing in the next year and a half. So if you have any questions about that.
Mr. Snipes?
I have one. I heard that your budget is intended for repair items. So it's kind of confusing to, I guess, wonder why.
We kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, wonder why in each compartment's line item, there should be a budgeted item.
No,
for.
It hasn't been that way for years. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Go that way. And it has changed depending on the various boards, various chairmen, various department heads. Be careful how I say this because I don't want it to sound like a criticism. It's there for repair because that's the size budget we have. So what you do is you have funds available to you based on the economic conditions. Well, while I say I'll tell you I want more funds, that's not reality. So you make the best use of those funds. At one time, those funds would have been triple what we have, so we could replace them all out of my department. We've subsequently went back to the original form, which is if you are elected office and you have computer funds, you pay for your computers. We provide the services to do that because you're on the county network. We secure it, make sure everybody's in compliance. The ones that we mainly replace would be those offices under you, the board, and or under the administration. I'm not sure how that's working nowadays, but that would be my department, the 5th floor, the finance department, I would say the planning department, but they have so many grants, they tend to pay for all of theirs, and thank goodness. And they did that even when we were their own way. Delbert has been very good about securing funds for that, so they pay for that. That would include the assessor, the county clerk in this building has computer funds, and there's been a combination over the years between them paying for some and us covering some. Again, if they were tight and they had machines running behind, I may take some leftover ones. We have update that and give that. They're not getting the best of something, but they're getting that. But that's how that's worked. It's a function of this is the money available to you. That's what you got to do with it. I'm not complaining about it. That's reality for me.
Right. But for my own, just for my own sanity, I'm thinking that if we know that there's a line item, there's computers, we do know at some point that they're going to depreciate and become out of existence. So I'm saying that there should be something in reserve to basically deal with that down the line, because we know that we're going to have to replace them versus coming into a what we call a repair budget. When I'm hearing the word repair, that means if something breaks down, then we go in and help it. But that's not going in to buy new computers for individuals or whatever, because that should be already tapped into the budget, that this is going to be amortized over 5 years or their life depreciated until it is zero balance, and we get anything else out of it, we can put it back on the books. And I'm just looking from an accounting perspective. But to say that when we needed to move forward, that we got to go into phases because we really haven't appropriated dollars for it. We're just going to let it happen out of repair budget. That's just doesn't settle well. It's not saying that in an ideal, we're living in an ideal world, but in a realistic world, you do, adjust for costs when these things depreciate versus waiting and doing things in tiers, because in the computer age, unless it's changed, things change rapidly. So we'll be operating on dinosaur by the time we upgrade to what we should have upgraded to 10 years ago.
Well, if I could, and this, while I agree that that's what we should be doing, we have a $4 million cash deficit in the general fund that does not allow us to operate. We should be prepaying our insurance for the year to take care of, advantages on interest and things like that. There's a lot of should be doing. That's why we repair instead of replace, is because we just don't have the cash to even put it in the budget. If we were to budget for this, it's probably 6 or 7 people that don't work here anymore. So, that's kind of where we're at. And I agree with you that we should be. There's just no way we can do it until we get our cash balances back to even between all three of them. And we're $4 million short on the general fund side. So we're moving in the right direction. We ain't there yet. So I agree.
And as you see, even when if we do get to the point where we do have cash reserves, and it looks like we were heading in that way. When I took over, and that was a long time ago, there was going to be a 3-year refresh. Well, I am from the private sector, been here long enough now, I'm from here now. You would never do it that way, because those computers are still good for those next two years, and you go as long as you can where they're still servicing. That doesn't mean you don't do what you're saying. You just stretch it out. So the original plan that was here to me was too aggressive. That you would have been redirecting funds in a way you didn't need to. So it'll be a combination of what I'm doing now. Yes, I would love for you to appropriate money, but me coming back to ask you for funds that you don't have is a waste of both of our time. So I'm making use of what's there, and I'm telling you, I believe I can get there or as close as I possibly can. And believe me, I had your thought when this was first put to me a few years ago. But the reason that I didn't come back and fight overly hard was because it did accomplish another thing. First of all, I can get it done. Closely get it done. I may go over at some point, but I'm going to always let you know. I'm careful, and I want department heads to get mad at me, but what we're doing right now, because we're addressing it per department, it makes the department heads that are requesting those PCs take ownership of that request. One thing happened when you first did the 3-year refresh. Everybody wanted everything now, whether they needed it or not. Well, that can go the other way, out of hand. So now that they need to have something, it may be a little bit messier, but they have to come to you and say, this is the project I'm working on, this is what I need, and this is why I need it. At least that actually empowers you to say, all right, that's okay or not okay. So I really can't argue about that. That allows you to do your job a little better. But yeah, I would rather have more funds, but there's a lot of stuff I'd rather have that I'm not gonna come and complain about, because I can do what for the most part, I can do what you're asking me within the funds. It is hard. It absolutely is hard, but.
But in reality. Any other questions? Mr. Vickery?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. I think that appreciation issue that Mr. Snipes is referring to applies more in the private sector than it does in our sector.
There's no tax benefit, right?
We don't have a tax issue, so that would apply more in the private sector. Thank you.
And that's kind of why we go until the computer can't work. It isn't that the computer can't work. The biggest driver now is when that department updates its software, it dictates the minimum standard that the hardware, and then well, you have to do this because this is making you do that. Then you don't really have a question because you're in a violation of your contract from the get-go, and that's never a tenable position to be in.
Yep. Anything else? Thank you.
All right.
Moving on, Health Department, Mr. Beavis, do you have anything today? Seeing none? No, I'm just kidding. No, I know. Just busting your chops.
Good morning. I had just 3 quick updates on some things that we've been involved with here recently. The first one is just a reminder, there's been a lot of stories on the news and in the paper regarding this season's flu activity. It is more severe than it has been in the past. I know there were some conversations taking place when I walked into the meeting. Some stories on the news. I know I saw one last night regarding a school up in Chicago that at least half the school, or maybe even more, came down sick, and so they've closed the campus down for a week. So it is pretty severe. It's going through our office. It's going through a lot of places. So it's just a reminder that this is an important time as it's colder out there. The schools and the classrooms and the settings, and a lot of people are in groups huddled together because you can't be outside and separate ourselves. So there's a lot of exposure that's going on. Not everybody's following the sick rules, as I call them. So just remember, this for your information. It's a contagious respiratory virus. It can be mild, it can be severe. Even if you got a flu shot, which we recommend you get one if you haven't, but even if you got a flu shot, it doesn't mean you're not going to get the flu. You could still get the flu. It's possible that if you get the flu, then your symptoms are less severe. Or there's so many different variants of the flu that the shot maybe didn't hit the mark. Sometimes that happens. And you're just going to get it. Typically, if you're a healthy individual, the symptoms are not as severe. If you've got other conditions that you're dealing with, then the flu symptoms can cause that to become worse. And so for individuals who are immunocompromised, the elderly, young children, it can spiral into something a lot more serious. And then obviously then we'd recommend, individuals seek medical attention, whether it's through their local doctor or going to the emergency room. On one particular night on the news, I saw a story where, they were saying that the hospitals are overwhelmed and you don't need to go in unless it's this. And then the next day they were saying, like, you need to come into the hospital if you're experiencing symptoms. So it's kind of confusing, the message that's coming out there, unfortunately. Anyone over 6 months of age and older can become vaccinated. You can get those at your doctor, you can get those at the pharmacies, you can get those at the health department. So call and make an appointment if you haven't gotten it. And then just there, if you're not going to do the shot, or if you've already gotten your shot and you do become sick, then obviously there's things that you can do. Cover your nose and mouth with a tissue when you cough or sneeze. Try not to sneeze into your neighbor's face. Wash your hands often with soap and water. And if you're sick with flu-like symptoms, and especially if you have a fever, you need to be staying home. We can't stress that enough, and it just amazes me that, you know, we have a lot of good soldiers out there that just don't want to miss a day for some reason or another. And I understand sometimes they need to work or have to work, and but that's how we spread this illness more often than not is because you've got individuals who then come in, and until they get so sick, then they have to stay home, but then they've already contaminated their office or their friends or somebody like that. So any questions regarding that? Just information. Yes, sir.
There was a youth that was on the news that died of the flu, but it was a rare complication that dealt with, I guess, this virus attacking the heart and giving them what it apparent like a heart attack or something. They say it's a rare case, but again, it happened. And a rare case is, since this virus appears to be aggressive than in the past, it would be a rare case, but can this escalate?
I don't know. I don't have a specific answer for that. The virus mutates every single time, you know, so as we all get sick with one particular virus illness, we develop the antibodies for it. And so then if you get hit with that again, then typically you would not have any kind of a response to that. And so that virus then's like, okay, I got to kick this up a notch and do something different. And then that's what happens. And that's why there's a different flu shot every year. It's not perfect, unfortunately. And again, you're right. I've seen a couple of those stories where it's not the typical individual that you would have expected to become seriously ill and or die, and in, you know, a short period of time, all of a sudden, it's you know, we're just dealing with newer strains of bugs, you know, every day.
Is there anything, I'm hoping at some point in time that the scientists and biologists and chemists can come up with a raid to rid us of these viruses, since these bugs continue to cause what they cause in the lives of humans and take lives or whatever. I'm thinking that aggressive research should be in order to counteract them or see them coming before they come.
I agree. That's not something we're able to do locally, obviously, at the health department or within our hospitals. However, CDC is working on that. I did see a story recently where they're working on a flu virus shot, you know, just the master shot, the one shot to rule them all, so to speak. And you know, I don't know how close we are to that. If every year we've got a shot that's containing 3 or 4 of the, you know, most common flus they expect that season, and even then sometimes, you know, some years it's right on the mark, and this particular year, you know, it's kind of 50-50. We're hearing information that, you know, maybe not so much this shot is getting the one that's out there that seems to be hitting everybody, and it's just why we're just trying to, it's another one of these things where we educate people. It's kind of like wear your seatbelt, don't drink and drive. We can preach it, and sometimes people are listening and sometimes they're not.
And we're sending that message to the schools as well, because I see they closed the school for that particular purpose because that.
Yeah, we at the health department, we communicate with the school nurses in the offices, you know, trying to track excessive absenteeism and you know, what is the cause of that, and then obviously then the schools we can provide them the education, and then they would have to take whatever action they deem necessary in regards to, you know, cleaning, sanitizing, how much of a population is affected at that time, and what they would need to do. Now locally, I don't know that we've had anyone that excessive that they've needed to close. This story last night that I saw was a Chicago school. I think it was the math and science school.
Well, I appreciate the updates, you know, on this type of thing. You know, I always try to temper that with what are we doing on the county level, and what actions would you need the board to take to further support that? And I guess that's where I'm you know, I always want to kind of bring that back to the discussion point of what's going on, what are we doing with the schools, you know, any of the type of things that we're talking about. I'm not telling you on your report, I'm just letting you know that I think a lot of board members would want to know, you know, what resources are we deploying, so when people ask us, we can fill them in, you know. So that's one of the, I don't know how the board feels about that stuff, but you know, we kind of know the rules on what to do and what not to do, but it's more of along the lines of, what resources is the county deploying? So when our constituents say, you know, what are we doing in the schools, or what are we doing for this and that and the other, we can at least tell them and be informed.
You know, one of the thing, you know, one of the third thing I'm going to talk about is the negative aspect of social media. However, the flip side of that would be the positive effects. And, you know, if you haven't or have and haven't done it, you know, something that we're, you know, social media, everyone almost has their own face page now. The health department has a face page, county board, schools do. So if you like the health department's face page, you know, we put information on there, education regarding West Nile virus, for example, the flu, for example. And so if those things pop up on your face page as you're looking at it, you know, then share that with your group of friends, you know, within your phone, and then that spreads out the information more so than even, you know, in terms of the numbers, I believe, you know, even more than reading the paper or listening to the radio. So that was the traditional way we got information out in the past. But now everyone's looking at their phone. So that's the quickest and best way to get some of that information out.
Perfect.
And so that's the quick and easy way to do it. And then just, you know, I'll continue to push and press when things come up. You know, West Nile virus is a quick example. Again, last year, we present that information every year. It's warm, wear long sleeves, and you're like, why are you telling me to wear long sleeves? It's 95 degrees outside. Well, because the mosquitoes are biting. We had a death last year, unfortunately, in another human case. So that's one of the reasons. And you know, when it hits closer to home, my wife came down sick with the flu last night. So now I'm dealing with it personally, and she didn't get a shot. So although I'm here, right, and I'm not at home taking care of her, so but no, it needs to be taken seriously, because you have to monitor, you know, these symptoms before it, you know, typically there's a fever involved, and so if it becomes a really high fever, then that's when you need to get aggressive with it and maybe call your doctor. If you're taking the Tylenol, for example, and it's not knocking that fever down, then there could be something more aggressive going on. And if there's a condition or an existing health condition, it can exacerbate, I think that's the word, that and then create a third issue that's even more dangerous for the individual. So it's not anything to make light of. I'm not doing that. So
I was, sorry.
Okay.
I've had a house full of sick for a week and a half, so everybody in my house has had the flu.
So that's what I'm looking forward to. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, I'm staying clear. I've stayed clear of everybody. So thank you for that.
All right, that was the first one. Second item was just, and then there's a third. Last Tuesday night, we had that second forum through the opioid grant, where we had the guest speaker that we had come in to talk about his life story, Tim Ryan. You know, the name of his talk was From Dope to Hope. One of the benefits of him coming was he's written a book, which is you know, basically what he presented, that life story, and he presented that book to everybody that came and hear him talk. So he spoke at the sheriff's luncheon meeting on Tuesday afternoon, and then he did two presentations, which I got to see one of them, which was very impressive, emotional, eye-opening for me. Spoke to about 15 inmates in the detention center, many of them the federal detainees, and they opened up. You know, they were asked questions, and they opened up a little bit about their personal history, and it put a human-esque, for me, story with individuals that, you know, from the outside, just, oh, there's guys in jail, girls in jail, you know, they made a bad choice, so they're going to get theirs. But they, you know, they had some personalized, they made some bad choices, I get it, but you know, their stories are like his story, and you know, he's been in jail, and he can connect with them, and hopefully that's a good start. So this grant that we have now, and I'm working with the coroner and the hospital on, is helping to train our first responders and get the Narcan out there, so that we can save lives. But the big message that came out of all that last week was that there's not much on the backside. After we pick somebody up, pat them on the back and say, okay, we saved your life. Now go down the road and, good luck. We don't have much there. And so that's where we're looking for additional grants and funding that we can get some treatment centers, detox beds and things like that in the community for that situation, and then get them in a position where maybe they can be reintroduced back into society and turn out like he did, So he's a recovering addict, just like a lot of us are recovering from not smoking, not drinking, whatever our little addictions are that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. That's no different than what he is and a lot of these inmates are dealing with. So 250 seats were available in that auditorium, and every one of them was full. So we were very excited that the turnout was as good as it was. He had a great message, and I feel, and the Journal did a great story over the weekend in regards to that. They did 2 stories on his presentation, and then they asked him, they did an interview with him specifically. We may try to get him back. He can tailor his talk a couple of different avenues. So obviously the way he presented to the individuals at the auditorium at KCC was a lot more toned down than what I heard him talking in the jail with the inmates. He can tailor his language to the audience. But, again, very educational, and I think they were very appreciative. There was a number of a lot of them got up and shook our hands as we were done and walked out of there. The inmates, I'm speaking of, thanking us for coming in there and at least listening to them. They felt like somebody was listening to them. Any questions on that? I know there were a few of you that were there.
Byrne.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks again for putting that all together and everyone involved. That was really just an eye-opener, and not only people realize how close to home this hits to everybody, the problem here and just everywhere.
It's, the statistic that's getting me that is becoming more apparent is that Kankakee had 56 deaths last year. Per our population, that's 51 per 100,000. That's kind of how the CDC, determines how severe something is in your particular area. And Will County, for example, had more deaths. I can't remember exactly how many, but they had more deaths than we did last year. But based on their population, they're at 15 per 100,000 people. So we're 3 times more likely to have somebody die from an opioid overdose in Kankakee County than even Will County is. And the president mentioned us then, when he signed a bill a couple of weeks ago in relation to equipment that border crossing guards, I think we're going to be able to have to help trace, potentially individuals bringing in supplies across, drugs and supplies across the border when they come in and when they're caught. So it is a various situation. Mr. Gessner says he doesn't think we've hit our peak yet. So I hope to goodness that this year we don't have more than 56. But if we can keep it that or lower, then maybe at least this educational part starting to hit home. More people are aware of what they can do and how they can do it. But the treatment of getting to these individuals who have these problems, these addictions, that's where we need to focus on and what we're trying on. I'm meeting with some individuals tomorrow to potentially discuss an avenue maybe that we can go down that road.
You may remember when I asked this board to authorize me to file suit against the opioid manufacturers, it wasn't just to deal with the human cost, which is just tragic. It's to deal with the cost of prevention, the autopsies we have to find so we can get a fingerprint of the actual strain, if you will, of the drug that they're using so we can go after the distributors. It's all the law enforcement. It's everything else that's associated with this. So when we filed suit, and I believe we were the first, everybody else has come on board in the state since us. But that's why it was done. It wasn't just to recover the cost of what Mr. Gessner is doing, which is the unfortunate end of the road for a lot of people that this gets a hold of. It's the prevention part. How do we keep them from going there? When people have the Narcan save, I don't know if you guys know how many of those actually they're 2 days later, we're back out doing it again, and it's just over and over again, saved same day. Yeah. So it's when the board took that action, and we asked Mr. Rowe to file on our behalf. It was for those reasons, and it's not going to stop. This wave hasn't crested yet. So, is there any other comments or questions, Mr. Hess?
Thank you, Chairman. John, the other night you mentioned, and I know this is true, that you can't go to the schools with this grant. Are we looking for anything that we could hit the younger kids?
Yes. This particular grant, one of the deliverables or within the wording of this grant indicated that it was for 18 years and older. So that's where we have to focus. So it isn't that we can't get into the schools, but we got to strategically figure out a way to get into the school. So we could go into a school and talk to teachers, coaches, administration, and then let them trickle that down to the students, because then it wouldn't be us doing it per se, and then get them to Narcan to potentially have on the site. So we are looking at that. We're the health department and the coroner's office also, I believe. We collaborate with a number of organizations within the county. So I'm involved with Pledge for Life. I have a couple of other individuals at the health department involved for Pledge for Life. They are focusing on, drug use. So they have a subcommittee and we're working with them, and they may be looking for a grant, that could supplement this and then possibly get into the schools themselves to provide this education. So we are looking at different ways to spread those fingers out. This particular grant a year ago when it was proposed and then we got it, came at a time when the county was, when Mr. Gessner was, dead broke with donations that had come in for him to be able to get the Narcan and do this training. So it at least got us going there. And I recognize, as I've learned more, that it doesn't solve the whole problem. It's a way bigger, issue, and there's so many components to how you can try to address this and where to address it, that this grant, our grant, doesn't do. But we're starting to look, and the president's talking about it. It is an issue not just here, but all across the country. And that being the case, we're going to find out here real quick: is talk cheap, or are they going to start throwing some money and grants out at agencies that they can apply for to try to address them locally?
My point being, though, is if Mr. Ryan touched 15 to 16 inmates, what could he do to a kid that's not been involved at all yet? Peer pressure.
I know. We
that's what I'm trying to get at.
We so wanted him to be able to go to a school, but we didn't know if the individuals who supervise our grant would have said, no, you can't do that because it's a school. Your audience is 18 years and younger, kind of a thing. Now, granted, we didn't do a poll of those, were mostly adults, but I know there were there were a lot of KCC students there, and that helped. But yes, we do need to get into the high schools, and I know that with Pledge for Life, they do have a substance abuse committee program, and they do a lot of that now, specifically along the opioid use. Not so much yet. It's mostly marijuana. But Mr. Ryan indicated that you ask almost any opioid addict what they started on, and marijuana was that. It's kind of like the beginning of, okay, that's great, now what's next and what's next kind of a thing. So, and then obviously the other point he made was that, the drugs from the 70s and 80s are the potency of those drugs are not what you're getting today. They're laced with all kinds of stuff today that make it far more worse. And when kids are going out and drinking at a party, then their inhibitions are down, and then somebody walks up and says, here, try this, and they're not capable of saying no. And if it's the wrong combination of something, they could be hooked, and then that's all it takes.
Was there any indication of, I know Mr. Gessner has talked about like the average age of the person who's overdosing and passing away, and that is far above the age of a high school student. And while I know that it is important to get to talk to the high school students about opioids and the dangers, I would prefer to see our medical community be educated on what to prescribe and what not to prescribe, because I think the gateway drug to heroin is opioid pills being dispensed to people like candy.
Right.
From the medical community, who I'm not going to disparage, but that's all that they're doing is they're throwing pills at people.
Right.
That's what our lawsuit centers on. And I wanted to draw the distinction that the true gateway drug to heroin has been opioids that are prescribed by the medical community, not marijuana. I think that that's kind of a misconnection there, in my opinion. And I think the data would support that. Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe at Criminal Justice Committee about a year or so ago, Mr. Gessner said 43 years old was approximately the age, and a lot of them would due to the fact that they would have surgery, have injuries, and would get prescriptions of painkillers, and that would be what would lead them. Their prescription runs out, they get hooked on OxyContin. Heroin's cheap, it's easy, accessible, and that's, well, it's not your typical like teenage drug, as it is.
But
People like to think. It
I
still
think you would
is,
agree we need to talk to them about
without
it.
a doubt. And then,
Because those pills are getting sold to teenagers.
and
You know,
that, and I know
so-
there's been a lot of work on the federal level about cracking down on the physicians and how they prescribe. And I mean, I hear people talk who have surgery and they're given a prescription for 100 pills.
Right, 10
And-
days.
Yeah, for 2 days. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yep. Mr. Snipes, please.
Well, I do agree that there need to be a strong educational presence among the medical profession. When these doctors prescribe these pills, the parents have them in the house. They might take one or two. They feel better. The rest are left. Easy prey for our teenagers. So the proactive approach to me would also to be in these schools, especially these high schools, where the potential is there for the abuse. And if we have a proactive approach, then they'll be educated along the lines, because if they're going to try something, they're generally going to try it around that age group. So, and because they don't have to get the prescription from the medical doctors, their parents do, maybe unknown to the parents, they go in and take these pills or whatever, and then voila, we have now a magnified opioid to the 10th power, versus if we educate it, it can be less.
Right, that's a good point, and I know within our committees that we're talking about, the opioid coalition group, all of these are being discussed and trying to educate. So, the local police presence through the coroner with Pledge for Life, we do have that Take Back Day. We do try to get a little, we're trying to get information out there to the public, about, these are the kinds of things, that they're not realizing that maybe, okay, the medicine's in my medicine cabinet, and they don't think that someone's going to come in, maybe switch out the medicine for Tylenol and take the opioid prescription, the harder drug, and then you just come in, you open it, you take a pill, you think you're taking your medicine, and you're not. Just like alcohol, you pour it out and you put a little water in there, I heard people do that. I don't know that.
I never did
So-
that much in high school.
But yeah, education through the students, through the parents, through the doctors. I know that Al Ponton with Riverside on our committee is talking about they're trying to and have implemented, beginning to process who's prescribing what in the community, so that if they do see somebody who, I've heard stories of individuals who got their teeth cleaned and got a prescription, 30-day supply. That's just not necessary.
Right. Any other questions? So you also had another situation.
Just one more thing. I just was in the paper a couple of weeks ago that on or about January 8th, there was a list circulated on social media. This is the negative aspect of social media, purporting to disclose that there were HIV and or herpes cases of various individuals, and that the information came from the health department. Mr. Rowe immediately contacted me once he found out. Someone had notified him who was on the list, and so they reached out to say, hey, this is not true. And he was asking me, to investigate, look into this matter. So we did. It's not our list. We don't create any kind of a list. One of the herpes is not something that we typically it can be tested for, but it's not tested at the health department as a routine test, and we don't keep that kind of a list. So it was a made-up list that appears to have come from somebody's friend list. If those are his friends, I wouldn't want to be his enemies. And then just put it out there as a joke. And then obviously then some of those friends saw it and spread it to their friends. And so it was getting out there that way. So it was not a true breach of any medical information that we have or would have had. You know, we put out the press release in conjunction with Jim Rowe, the state's attorney's office, and the health department, that we take seriously, you know, our patients' information. We want them to be able to trust us when they come in, that what services they're getting, whatever those are, that it's going to be, you know, on the up and up, that we're not going to get any of that kind of information out there. Very quickly, apparently, when the news got out about this press release, the postings started disappearing, probably because they were trying to erase their traces, I hope. We've not been contacted that they found anybody. We may not ever find who the originator was, but it does seem to have come out. But it just goes to show the negative impact sometimes that somebody doesn't like you. You know, they can put it on Facebook, and by gosh, if it's on Facebook, it's true, right? That's what everybody says. So, and then they spread it. And then even if you put out the argument that it's not true, they don't believe you now, and you get into this war. So we don't get into that. But I want to appreciate, you know, thanks state's attorney for their help in this matter, and then just assure everybody this was not our list. It was not any of our employees. We don't have this kind of information. The STD information that we do work with is handled in a very much more secure fashion than something like this, you know, getting out. So I just wanted to make sure, in case there were any questions, or if anyone had said anything to you in the meantime, that they were concerned or had any thoughts.
Any questions? Awesome.
That's all I
Thank
got.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Moving on to schools, Dr. Greg Murphy, not here today, but I do have his quarterly report. I need a motion to put on file. Mr. Legess, Mr. Vickery, second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Let's see, VAC, no one here to report. There was a meeting tonight. You may have heard things. Personnel HR issues, none today. Under administrative, resignations, appointments, and reappointments. I'll go ahead and read these into record, then take a motion to combine and approve at the end of that. The resignation of William Gilmore from the Kankakee County Public Building Commission. Appointment of Ralph, is it Mercier? Mercer. It's Mercer to the St. Anne Fire Protection District. Thank you, Mr. Seroy. Appointment of Jeff Jarvis to the Board of Examiners and Appeals. He's the architect. Reappointment of Dave Tyson to the Board of Examiners and Appeals as the engineer. Reappointment of Janine Wolf to the Emergency Telephone System Board, 911. Reappointment of Patrick McConnell, is that how you pronounce that? Patrick McConnell of the Kankakee County Board of Health. Reappointment of Loretto Cowig to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. Motion to combine and approve. Mr. Lear, second. Mr. Washington, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Openings. 2 openings on the Kankakee County PBC. There was one opening that was vacant, another created by Mr. Gilmore. We have 1 candidate in-house, so if anybody knows anybody that would be interested in joining that commission, it's a, you know, not very active right now, but they're the ones who floated the bonds for the jail and things like that. So public improvement infrastructure projects. Buildings, should I say. 1 opening on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, 4 openings on the Board of Examiners and Appeals, 1 opening on the Joe Bennis Drainage District, 1 opening on the Manteno Drainage District number 3, and 1 opening on the Manteno number 9 Drainage District. Other business. Moving on to the first item in your packet, I'll direct you first to page 4 of that. Yes. Let's get to it under new business, if we would, if that'd be appropriate at that time. I got people in the back that have some things that I know you want to go. Oh, wait a minute, you do have to leave at 10, do you not? Is the board okay if I amend and I'd allow some new business at this time? Motion to approve. Mr. Legess, second. Mr. Seroy, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. I do have to forgot about that. 4 openings for the Board of Examiners. Oh, just a moment. Got it. Thank you. No, I didn't have the mic on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's my fault.
We talked about this at one of the last meetings about adding the HVAC contractor in here, and the reason for that is each one of these disciplines, electrical and plumbing, and the HVAC, all the counties and cities have 3 inspectors: the electrical inspector, plumbing inspector, and mechanical inspector. And I think we need to have an HVAC guy on this board because the rest of these people are in their own disciplines and not in the discipline of HVAC. Electricians and plumbers have their own disciplines, and the HVAC, we have our own disciplines. We have to, in the mechanical code, we have to know 5 different codes, mechanical code, resident, all the different codes in there. So it would behoove us to have somebody with that knowledge in that discipline on that board.
So this is part of the county's code of who represents and is being on there. It would take an amendment to the county's code, our county code, to do so. So are you making that motion?
I would like to make a motion that we amend that to include an HVAC person on that committee.
And we would send that to the full board for approval?
Yes.
We would send it to the state's attorney, obviously, first to make sure we had everything buttoned up. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
All right, because that's under new business. Trying to figure out how we handle this, because we can't necessarily make a motion. It's not on the agenda. As I saw Mr. Quinn in the back stand up and look at our agenda, his silence is deafening on this issue. So let me think about this a minute here. Do you have a suggestion, Mr. Lear?
Mr. Chairman, I think if this were referred to PZA, then the planning department would be able to make comment on that. I don't think they're present here today, are they?
So if we put it on PZA's for their agenda the next time, yeah, they canceled this month. So if we put it on PZA for next month, since they are the organizer of that committee, and then they will send it to the full board. Are you okay with that example? So
It just makes sense to me that you've got a discipline of electrical and plumbing, and again, all the codes address electrical, plumbing, HVAC separately.
Okay.
You don't have the plumber doing electrical work, electrical inspections and so forth, electricians doing plumbing.
Okay.
And nobody does. We
So
do
if
our
this
own-
committee has a head nod agreement, we'll just ask it to be on the PZA committee. Are we good with that? Yeah, we'll take the motion off
Okay,
officially. So, okay,
that's fine.
sounds good.
And I do have to leave.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you, board.
See you, Pat. Have a
All
good day.
right. Elvis is leaving the building, so when he, we'll take care of that for you, Pat. Appreciate it. So we're there. Okay, amendment to Exhibit A of the Economic Alliance Agreement. Before we get going, a motion to approve this. Mr. Washington, a second. Mr. Vickery. Just for explanation's sake, it came to our attention that we needed to amend some of the language. It was actually through a FOIA because we had somebody take a look, and we never actually stuck by the letter of this agreement on the appointment of the replacement for Mr. Van Mill as the chairman of the Economic Alliance. Well, the Alliance hired the person, it went to committee, it was approved, and it never went to the full board. This was back in last administration, it never came back here. So we had to figure out, okay, first of all, we got to clean this up, and it took us, it gave us an opportunity to look through the rest of the agreement and then readdress with the Alliance some of the things that needed to be changed in the agreement because times have changed. The board member makeup of the Alliance has changed. So what we did was we sat down, Mr. Vickery and I met with the chairman of the Alliance and the board chair, obviously, and we sat down and the CEO, Mr. Nugent, and we talked about this, and there's a few changes in here that we have to do, one at the insistence of the state's attorney's office, and that's what's on page 4. I'll bring that to your attention. This was one of those that we didn't know about that we have to fix. It has to do with the term. Boards can't be bound, and the original agreement, we didn't reauthorize this every 2 years, as the case may be, as the board changed. So we need to reauthorize this every 2 years. So we're going to put it on our calendar to do this. Okay, that's just more of a functional thing. We can't just have it be evergreen. It has to come back. So you'll see in there that's basically, that's the only change at the top part. We're going to reauthorize it every 2 years. Also, it didn't make, the arbitration clause didn't make any sense going forward. So we've put that back to the Alliance. I haven't heard back with any objections on that. So, you know, they have this paperwork. If there's anything that they have that they would want to address, we'll do that, whether it be an amendment at the full board, but we do need to move it on to the full board to clean this up. So because they are county employees as well is why we have to look at what's on page 7. And it's the highlighted section there. In order for them to have access to the benefits that they want to have access to, and as our contribution to the Alliance, because we want to support that, that's why this section has been amended, is because we still have to have the oversight. When this started, the county, I want to say around $200,000 a year to get it going is what we put into it. And it's been since, you know, we have a lack of funds, they have more able to sustain through private donations and what they're doing as far as funding from the EDA side of things. And the board membership has changed. The county has backed off on money and reduced the amount of board members they have. And so we're looking at a situation where they're still county employees. We do need to be able to approve after, you know, the hiring committee, if you will, brings a candidate forward. So that's what we have in principle agreement with the Alliance, that the county board chairman or his or her designee will be part of the hiring committee that brings a candidate forward of anybody who wants to work at the Alliance that will be a county employee. And so by default, that would be anybody who has access to county benefits. Does that make sense? So we will still have that last stamp of approval and we'll be involved in the hiring process. But since we're not providing the lion's share of the funds anymore, and since we don't want to have direct oversight over the day-to-day operations, that's all we are. And it's basically that last stamp. So I just want to make sure that the board knows why this is happening, because we used to have an actual department head running the Alliance. Now it's a little less formal and we have less money that we're contributing. We still want to contribute something. So is there any questions about that? Okay. So I don't expect to hear anything back, but if I do, there'll be any changes noted to the full board and we'll discuss amendments at that time. Make sense? So I have a motion. Since this will at some point be spending money, we'll go with a roll call vote on this because it does involve IRMF contributions, FICA, you know, things like that. So need a roll call.
Mr. Washington? Aye. Mr. Legess? Aye. Mr. Vickery? Aye. Mr. Hess? Aye. Mr. McConnell left. Mr. Snipes? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Seroy? Aye. Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Lear? Aye. Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All righty. Whatever you're comfortable with. You got to show that shirt off. You come up to the front. Yeah, we could see it in Google Earth.
Well, you know you're all going to buy one at the end of the day.
So basically, this the closing of the county clerk's office for non-election matters on election day, it was something that was brought up. I think it was another one of those cases where it wasn't on the agenda, so we couldn't actually vote on it that day. So I want to get to that point here. Oh, okay. We don't have a resolution yet. Actually, we're going to create that. Graham, is this something that we're going to need a resolution? I think we need a resolution from the board. Yeah. This is much like when we voted to close the treasurer's office. I don't know, when you were in that committee, I mentioned that we had to check it out. It has to be an action of the board in order to alter the hours of those type of constitutional offices. So if there's any questions, please, and if you want to explain a little bit about why you're asking for this.
We had 2 years ago, we had asked the committee for the same thing, and I don't know that there was a resolution that took place. I believe that it was just an informal nod of the head. I think I would prefer to have a resolution that authorizes us on election day. You know, we're going to be swamped with phone calls from judges and voters, and staff will be out at polling places. So we have the potential to be very thin in the office for regular functions on election day. Like I said, 2 years ago for the primary and the general, we were closed for non-election functions on election day. So no passports, marriage licenses, birth certificates, or anything of that nature.
So statutorily, we looked into it and we have to make it an action of the board. because that's what the state requires, is any alteration of the hours or duties of that office, blah, blah, blah. So, Mr. Legess.
So this would just be primary and generals? What about municipal elections?
I think that because of the lower turnout for those elections, that we'll be able to adequately staff our office for the non-even year elections.
Okay.
Is this intended to be something that we're just authorizing now, or is this an evergreen request?
You know, given current staffing levels, I could see us making that request again in the year 2000.
So we'll just do it for this upcoming election? Is that what you're asking for?
For the primary and or the general?
Yes,
or
both. Yeah, for the next,
for
basically.
the 2018 elections?
Yes.
Yeah, that would work for me.
Okay, noted. We'll do that we'll note that on the motion if there is one.
Yeah, I think it'd be better to have a resolution and we can post it like we did when we closed the treasurer's office.
Okay.
You know, they actually put a copy of the resolution on the window and the public can see. It isn't just Dan that said we're closing, it's by order of the board or whatever.
Okay. Alrighty. Is there anybody who wants to make that motion first? Mr. Byrne? Second, Mr. Washington? Any more discussion, questions about that?
Resolution come right straight to the board then?
It'll go right to the board. Yeah, it'll go to the full board next month, or this next full board meeting. Is that enough time, Mr. Quinn, to do your scribing? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Question, Mr. Vickery?
Question is, what is the date of the general that should go in that? We should put the dates,
We'll put the dates into it. It'll be the primary and the general.
the primary and the general.
March 20th is the primary date, and November 6th is the date of the general.
Okay. Is that okay on the motion and second?
We'll note
The
it.
dates?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vickery and Quinn.
Our helper back here, Graham.
We got a guy. All right. Relocation of Kankakee 14 polling place. Yeah, we had some issues, I guess.
We had some issues. Friday, shortly before noon, I received a call from the executive director of the park district to let me know that while she was doing inspections of the buildings, she was at Pioneer Park and had seen that the water pipes had frozen and ruptured, and there's extensive water damage in the building at Pioneer Park. She told me that there was standing water in all of the light fixtures. She told me that she was almost 100% certain that it would not be usable as a polling place, not only for the primary election, but depending on how much damage there was, it might not be available again. So I had spoken to the chairman, and when we got it on the agenda for this meeting, I spoke to Mr. Washington. I believe that what I think we can do for the primary election is move the voters that were at Pioneer Park over to the Housing Authority for this election. Like I said, I spoke to Mr. Washington and the two aldermen in the city of Kankakee, Mr. Tedder and Mr. Brown. All of them were in agreement that it didn't seem to be an issue for this election. So I would like to relocate the polling place from the Pioneer Park to the Housing Authority for the primary election.
Let's do a motion in a second first. Mr. Washington, second, Mr. Lear. Do we have to notify voters? So do we have to send out a mailing?
I will be sending out postcards to all the registered voter households in addition to radio, social media.
Okay. Alrighty. Any other questions? Mr. Snipes.
Just one, is this a temporary move until they get it fixed, or is it going to be a permanent move?
Without knowing what the damage is at that building and how long the repair to that damage will be, I can't speak beyond the primary election. What this does give me some time post-primary if we can find out, what the status of that building will be, to find another location in that precinct.
Okay.
So If we need to find it someplace else in the precinct, I'll get that to the Community Services Committee, certainly before the June meeting.
This was what, Friday you walked in?
Friday
and
at
so we had to
noon.
get it on this to have a solution ready. So or else we would have went to Community Services next month, but that was unacceptable, so. Or else we probably would have went to full board first without any committee work, so that's why we're here. So, all righty, I guess we have a motion and a second, is that correct? All right, all those in favor? Those opposed?
Thank you.
All righty, thank you. Moving on, under new business, the first item is the extension of the intergovernmental agreement for the promotion of tourism in your packet. And I believe that was the 2013 version. We needed to extend that because we're working on in terms of a new agreement, but we don't want this one to lapse in the meantime. So we were looking to extend this. It was on the other one. I'm trying to. What was the date that we were looking to, Mr. Kankar? What was the date we're looking to extend this to?
It would be the end of October 31.
October 31st of 2018. So what this does is allow us to tread water under the current agreement, and I'm asking the board to move this forward because that will allow us to talk about what the CVB and their representative, or representation, sorry to sell you short. They have a representative and representation here today, but we want to at least be able to not have to, in an emergency react. So we don't want this one to expire. So unless there's any questions, I'll take a motion. Not yet. Motion. Mr. Seroy, second. To extend. Mr. Washington until October 31st. And it could be sooner. We may come up with an agreement hopefully before then, and then we'll be able to move right into that. So second was by Mr. Washington. Since we're not spending money, we're just transferring tax money. Mr. Lear, question?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The implications of this action would be we would need to go to all of someone would need to go to all of the cities and get them to agree to this type of extension also. Does that mean?
That is the CVB, and I believe have they already done that, or is this the start of the process?
Chairman, we brought it to you first. And
Okay.
if we get your approval, then we'll go to each of the municipalities as well.
Oh, okay. All right. So this would be approved here, go to the full board, but in the meantime, I'm sure you would try to get it on their agendas
And
as
we'll
quickly as
start it
possible.
Today, we'll start the process, yes.
The extension.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Byrne.
Just to clarify, maybe I'm sounding redundant, but just the current agreement is what we're voting on. We're not doing any changes, what we
No.
discussed last time.
Nope, we're going to talk about what they're
Okay.
proposing after
Okay.
this. I wanted to make it clean. Just kind of push this out so we have an agreement in place and then start talking about the future.
Okay.
So, any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Quinn, we're not actually spending money, it's passed through. We can go voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. So now, on the new side of things, many people got a letter kind of explaining, there's been kind of a shift a little bit on what the CVB is proposing. So with that, we have an opportunity to either ask questions. Stacy's here from the CVB and their representation, so we'd be able to hear what they're talking about. And then as we move forward in the structure here, it would come back to this committee. We're not going to vote on anything today. This is something about what we're working towards, because I thought it would be a good idea. We've had some conversations. Things have kind of come more around to what I think this board might want to entertain. It's like our other agreements we have with the Alliance and the ETSB 911 board. So I wanted to at least bring that to the attention here, and then we'll come back and ask questions and do whatever. So please, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking each of you for allowing us the opportunity to come to make a formal presentation today. I know each of you received the communication from our attorney, Mr. Kankar. I know it's a lot of content to digest, but I promise we'll try to make it as easy as possible and kind of work through it. This year we celebrate our 35th anniversary. I understand there's been some ups and downs with the CVB, sometimes twists and turns. But I do stand here before you today with a vision to take our CVB to the next level. We are a not-for-profit organization that receives our funding from two sources, the state LTCB grant, as well as our local hotel tax. When I was hired in May 2016, I was instructed by our board to move forward to determine a mechanism to offer a retirement fund or a retirement opportunity for our employees. One of which is a single mother who has worked for the CVB for almost 6 years without anything in place for her retirement, and one of which is me, who I've worked with the CVB for 20 months with a contract with this benefit in it, but haven't actually allocated any funds to it because I'm very committed to this program that we're working on currently. My goal for the CVB is obviously to take us from just putting up billboards and hoping that we see an increase in revenue to really executing campaigns to grow the tourism in this county. We see a potential 3 new hotels coming up in the next year, and I'm hoping that we get to a point where we require additional employees, that we have an organization that people want to work for. I realize a 401k is easier, but easier is not always the best solution. So we're excited to be able to work on this with you. I hear this board and the chairman talk about being progressive and taking this county out of the identity crisis that we're all experiencing on a day-to-day basis and making this a great place to work and to live and to raise a family. And if we want to compete with employers, whether it's the private sector or outside of the area, to retain these young individuals to raise their family here, I do ask that we consider the proposal that Mr. Kankar has put together, at least have a healthy conversation about it. So I'm very excited to be able to have this opportunity to do that today, answer any questions that you guys may have, and then in the end, hopefully be able to offer a tool to these potential employees in the future, as well as the employees of the CVB currently. So with that, I give you Mr. Kankar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, Commissioners. First, I guess I want to thank you for extending the term of the existing intergovernmental agreement. I think that no matter which way we decide to go on this thing, it's important that we have the time to discuss the issues and ultimately make an informed decision. So as for the proposed intergovernmental agreement, I don't want to talk too much about the specific text of that that is there, rather than the objectives that we're trying to accomplish and the vehicles we propose to accomplish them. Long ago, the units of government that are parties to the IGA realized that the benefits of tourism don't really know a territorial boundary. And rather than cannibalize each other's tax revenue with a patchwork of tourism schemes, they decided to combine their efforts to reach a mutual end that was beneficial to them all. The expedient to that end was a contract whereby the Kankakee County would levy a hotel tax collected in lieu of the individual municipalities. The hotel revenue, once collected, would be turned over to the CVB and reinvested in the community to promote tourism and conventions. Today, the CVB's operations are approximately 90% funded with hotel tax revenue. The 10% came, as Stacy said, from state grant funds. I don't think it's controversial, given the funding ratios, that we propose to make the CVB an instrumentality of the units of government that fund its operations. And to that end, I'm talking about there being no private memberships or private interests in that entity. So it would be a public entity under the law. And generally, that would be enough to allow participation in IMRF. However, IMRF is smart enough to know that an entity created by contract can be dissolved by the termination of that relationship. And therefore, if that were to occur, there would be no entity to subsidize any unfunded liability that accrued during the CVB's operations. So in order to protect the integrity of the fund, they require that the creator, so to speak, of the instrumentalities back the CVB's obligations or the instrumentalities' obligations for participating in IMRF. What we're proposing is an intergovernmental cooperative. So each of the units of government that would be party to the agreement would bear their proportionate share of the responsibility of that instrumentality. Giving the funding ratio of hotel tax revenues to what we're projecting as our IMRF contribution, I think that assuages any fear that units of local government will become generally responsible for this liability. However, as an additional prophylactic measure, the CVB, in conjunction with the municipalities that have already approved this agreement, have added some things to the IGA. For example, each January and July, the CVB would be required to project its next six monthly IMRF contributions and deposit that amount of money into a trust account. That the money in that trust account would be pledged for IMRF contributions, and CVB would have an obligation to monitor that account such that if any if their next monthly payment came below what was in that amount, they'd have to replenish it. The units of local government under the agreement would have auditing rights to that account and could force the CVB to replenish it should they refuse to do it or fall below. Now, I don't see that happening because the board of directors would be representatives from all the units of local government, but it's just in there as extra protection. In addition to that, we proposed an intercept where if, for example, they refuse to, the CVB would not replenish the fund, or let's say it missed a IMRF contribution, Kankakee County would be able to intercept funds that it collects and take that money to either replenish that trust account or pay IMRF the liability that wasn't paid. So at least it gives an extra amount of protection. Finally, under the agreement, there is a priority of sources, and hotel tax revenue is the main source there. So even if one community was collecting, only if there was even if hotel tax revenue was coming from one community, that money would go to that before anybody would become generally responsible for it. Finally, at the end of this, we have, assuming there was no hotel tax revenue, which would be quite an anomaly, I believe, but let's say that was the case, everybody would bear their proportionate share according to their the hotel tax revenue that was collected during the term of the agreement. So that is what we're proposing. We don't think it's a real financial risk, and we think that the coverage is there to move forward with that. Now, I would like about the employees. I think that, at least in my opinion, since I've been involved in Kankakee County, and that's since about 2003, 2004, the CVB is, I guess, the most visible now in terms of promotional efforts than I can remember. And I think that's a testament to the women down there that work so hard promoting this county. They have a commitment to working early in the morning, to working after most of us are at home with our families, and even on the weekends. They do that without the benefit of retirement benefits, and they even must wrestle with the notion that every 5 years they may be out of a job if the parties to this agreement stop funding the CVB. So what we're asking is that Kankakee County join the municipalities that have already approved this agreement and agree to provide for retirement security of those employees that work so hard, that not only live in this county, but work so hard to promote it. And we thank you for your support. That I can answer any questions any of you might have.
Mr. Snipes.
I have one, three questions that were presented by constituents. So though I take their questions under advisement, I think you all can answer better than I can. And since they're up on camera, they can review it at their own. The first one they asked was, why don't you seek a 401k? Number two is, what makes this different from the Kankakee County Housing Authority, the Kankakee County Community Service, and the VAC? Are you opening up a can of worms for them to come in, and then the price you pay for an attorney could be put into the 401k, I guess, whatever that meant. But go ahead.
I guess, well, the latter one, I don't really know. Maybe it's a possibility, right? So, but as far as a private retirement, I'd be out of a job, though, if everybody said that. As far as private retirement, yeah, you could also do that. This would be a defined benefits plan, though, as opposed to a defined contribution plan. So that's a little bit different, right? It's better security for the employees. Secondly, we wouldn't, the investment of that fund is really left to IMRF as opposed to the individuals, or if they would hire an administrator to do that. And so it's, we believe, less expensive considering the amount of employees that would be involved in this, which we are projecting obviously at 2 right now.
Okay, so that's for the 401k. And how would you differentiate this from the other entities that say they're Kankakee County if they decide, well, we should be entitled to the same thing and come to the county? Yeah, they're saying, would that be opening up a can of worms? I don't know.
And I don't know what those organizations are, how they're formed or created. So that's...
Well, they're all non-for-profit.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, this one, obviously, we're making an effort, right, to form this thing so it would qualify for IMRF. In that regards, we're going to limit it to public entities as the participants. There's going to be no private memberships in it at all. No private money. Right? I mean, I guess somebody could contribute to it, but there's no private funding of it. And realistically, you have to agree. As the instrumentality of the units of local government, we have to get everybody on board to agree to take secondary responsibility for a liability if it should occur.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you. I guess the big question is for a cash-strapped county is how much is it going to cost us?
$348 a year.
Nothing?
Yeah. And I actually have a letter I sent. I didn't know if everybody would have received it or not, but okay, so I have a couple charts attached to this, and this is really kind of just explains, well, it kind of shows. Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thank you. I'll give you mine.
So if you look to the charts here, the first chart I have here is, of course, the fiscal year 2017 hotel tax revenue collections. Keep in mind, this is the CVB's fiscal year, not your fiscal year. So there might be a little bit difference in your numbers and what you're used to as opposed to ours. So this shows the amount of money that comes in through hotels and motels within each of the municipalities in the unincorporated areas of Kankakee County. The second chart here is annual responsibility, actual percentage as adjusted. So what I did here, when determining how entities would be responsible for their share, I wanted to start with the idea that everybody would be, no matter, depending on how much hotel revenue came in within their municipality, that would be the share of their responsibility. With that being the first thing, Village of Bourbonnais obviously doesn't have a hotel, so they don't generate any hotel revenue, yet they receive a lot of the benefit. Go ahead. I don't know.
No, I have to go because I have something.
Yeah. No. So the Village of Bourbonnais.
Good thing is the meetings are recorded.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the Village of Bourbonnais doesn't have a hotel, doesn't have any hotel tax revenue, but obviously with the Bears Camp, they receive a lot of the benefit of it. So what I proposed is to have their share fixed at their population as compared to the rest of the community. So that's at roughly 18%. Then I put back in your proportionate share based on hotel tax revenue into the balance. And you can actually see on the last chart how the share would differ. Okay, so the gray column here would be based on population, if that's how the share was done. The last chart. The red one is based on actual receipts, without taking into account Bourbonnais' population or anything like that. And the final one is the actual as adjusted, which is the population of Bourbonnais and the hotel receipts. So you can see the amount, except for Bourbonnais, which is based on population, the rest of the units of local government go down based on plugging them into that. So realistically, what we're looking at on a monthly basis for Kankakee County, if all else failed, there was no hotel tax revenue, is $29.03 a month.
All right, so I need to make sure I got my head around that.
Yeah.
If we lost our 2 hotels, you never know what's going to happen.
Yes.
We're still capped at that amount. Or does it go to our population?
No, you could actually, if you lost your 2 hotels, let's say this agreement is for 5 years, you lose your 2 hotels in 2 years into this agreement, we're only counting the revenue that you collected within those 2 years. And so realistically, your percent is going to go down. It's going to be a moving average. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if for some reason Kankakee County pulls in, a 1,000-room hotel and starts generating a big amount of money, that amount's going to go up because you're going to pull in more hotel tax revenue. Right. So it'll be a moving average over the course of the agreement.
And that's redetermined every 5 years.
Well, it would be moving it, right. So whatever it would be, if that needs to kick in, let's say that there was no hotel tax revenue or we didn't have enough, then we'd measure it right there. So we'd be watching it as we move along. Realistically, it's not going to matter as long as there's enough hotel tax revenue to do it, because that's what's going to be pledged for.
Sure. Well, from my standpoint, and this board
Yes.
needs to know that, I would be concerned that, you know, if we lose all of our hotels and then it's based on population, then we're up at 24% or something like that.
No, it'll never be
Yeah.
based on population for you guys.
I believe we have the one on 50 and I can't remember what the other one is. The list was on the original letter. I don't have it here in front of me, but yeah, the one by Denny's, and then I'm not sure what the other one is.
No, so you're right, Chairman. As long as you have 1 month of hotel tax revenue coming in during the term of this agreement, your share is going to be based on that, not population.
Right. And that's through for every 5-year agreement. So does that make sense? The way that's my main concern with this is that we would be bound to 20x amount of percent, 24 or something like that. I can't remember the exact, because between Kankakee and the county, it was well over 50% of the liability would have been absorbed.
Yeah, I believe you both were
Yeah.
close to around 25%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Based on
Mr.
population.
Seroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe, this is all based off of 4 employees, correct?
It's correct. So we have 2 full-time, 2 part-time. The 2 part-time don't meet the 1,000-hour standard, so there'll be two employees.
Two employees. So what happens if they go to 4 or 8? Do we have any control over that number?
Well, yeah, I'll let Stacy. I can answer it, but I'll let Stacy talk to it.
If we go to 4 or 8, that we have a budget that's been approved by our board of directors that allows us to say that we have enough revenue to justify those employees. So, your chairman's board of directors, all the directors are appointed by the municipalities or the county that participate. So, there is a level of control. So, and I would hope that me as the leader of the organization wouldn't put more people in place that we can't afford. So, hope that answers that. Joe, if you have anything else.
And I do think that is it's a relevant point. If we are the board, I'm assuming would be kind of remade up, if you will, based on the governmental side. I wouldn't expect all of these decisions to be made on an executive board that your chairman or another municipality's mayor or their representative wouldn't be sitting on.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be outside of those decisions. I would have to almost insist on it. I think that's kind of what they're talking about.
All right.
It changes from a P3 type to a more of a really governmental organization that each representative is accountable to the decisions and the needs of the board.
Okay.
Yeah, we would need we would need a quorum present to conduct a meeting, and so there wouldn't be, if there's, depending on the numbers, an executive committee just couldn't do that. We couldn't have that structure, right? It would just depend on what's going on.
Yeah. Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It appears to me that they've done a lot of good work here, and I assume that's with some conversations with you that
Yes.
have occurred. And I want to compliment you on moving this forward. I know I made some calls and talked to an attorney at IMRF in terms of what would be necessary for a organization to be eligible to be part of IMRF, and he indicated that the intergovernmental agreement is a typical kind of business unit that is part of IMRF. So this is a good step. I also might speak to the question, although I know Mr. Snipes isn't here, but just to get on the record, the question that some of his constituents are asking about 401s as opposed to a defined benefit program. I think that it would be appropriate to recognize that IMRF is a pension system that is funded at more than 90% of their liability, and so they are not in the same position that the public is undoubtedly aware of in terms of the different pension systems that are funded by the state government. And so this is one important difference. Another important difference I would suggest is the fact that clearly we have an organization here that's made up of governmental units. For better or worse, governmental units aren't going to go away. 401s are more appropriate for the private business, which may or may not have the same kind of lifespan. Whether we like government or not, it's always going to be here. Individual businesses can disappear. So I thought that that might be part of what Mr. Snipes might want to share with his constituents.
So fact of the matter is the pension system is going to, as long as Cook County and St. Clair are still a part of Illinois, it's going to exist. So we have to live in reality, and at some point we have to kind of realize that we're not going to be able to change those things on the state level. The one thing that I think that is without any argument is that this can exist if it's done this way. That is why we all, the state's attorney's office, we all acquiesce that this type of arrangement is legal to exist. The only question that remains is if you can use tourism dollars to fund a pension system. And so we're waiting on that decision, and I think we need to press for that decision, because I think if we don't press, we won't get an answer. Especially with the climate of somebody not running again, and this type of things, and people wanting to make political statements in their run for that office. I can tell you that I'm going to be asking for, let's get us up the chain a little bit. I can't say that they're going to respond. So we have to be prepared to either act or not act based on a response or a non-response. I hate to say it like that, but it's kind of where we're at. The one thing I will ask, have the municipalities agreed to this version that you are discussing right now, or do you have to go back?
Right. No. So what we did originally, the original form of the agreement, we had everybody approve it in substantial form, and they gave the mayors the authority, once a final form was determined, to go back, look at it with their attorneys, and if it was any worse, it would go back to board. Obviously, this is a lot better to the individual units of local government than the original agreement was. I don't think there's any question about that.
Right.
So Kankakee and Momence approved this version of the agreement as it sits in front of you. The other municipalities, if we get this board's approval, or if we get this board's approval with changes, then we'd send it back to the mayors and the attorneys and just say, is this substantially the same form, agree to it, and we'd move forward based on that.
Okay. So if this is more questions, obviously we're not going to take any action today, but we want to make sure while we've got them here not to waste their time. Ask anything you want. If there's any questions whatsoever, and I'm sure email works for you as well.
That's fine.
So we can get stuff to you. If any board members, please, you don't need to come through me. Reach straight out to them. To Stacy, she'll get everything up the ladder. Miss Sweber.
What you stated, I believe, is that this is a government organization, a governmental organization employing people.
That's what they're moving towards. That's what this new agreement would do. It would reorganize the CVB into a quasi-governmental organization.
So they would be employees of a government agency.
They would be employees of a quasi-governmental agency, whereas, much like UCCI, government officials are hiring people for that organization. So that's why I think that there is a more of a reasonable expectation that, yes, and that's why, it's not even more of, it is a reasonable expectation that they can have access to IMRF. They wouldn't be getting it through us. They would be accessing it through the CVB. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't need us to be able to access those benefits.
So in other ways, if it isn't a hotel tax that's funding the pension, what is the versus?
There is nothing.
No, I mean, if I work for the Village of Herscher and I have IMRF, is it my salary that's funding it then, or what is funding it then if it's not hotel tax?
Oh, okay, it's their general fund.
Yeah, correct. The municipalities, each municipality can levy a tax. It's not subject to PTEL. It's unlimited as to amount, but they can serve for IMRF purposes. And so you would just levy tax for that, much like the county of Kankakee does.
So it's a taxpayer money.
Well, in any aspect, it's taxpayer money.
It's any money.
Yeah.
Right, but the CVB, just to be clear, the CVB doesn't have any taxing power. So we're going to be relying on the hotel tax revenue, or to the extent we can use the state grant to move to do this, we would also do that. It just depend on.
So if let's just say the state says, you know what, we're gonna need 14% of the hotel motel tax now to come to the state of Illinois. We're gonna change the rules.
They will.
Well, if they can, they will,
Yeah.
pretty much. And so there are some unknowns, but in the end, if the money's not there to collect it, the money is not there to be paid as well. So the CVB, if the state were to say that all that hotel motel tax is going to come to Springfield, much like they did with the road money, and we'll operate it from here, then it will cease to exist as far as our liability at that point. They'll have to pay for this. That's what I'm talking about. They can't take all the revenue money and then leave it us to pay for the pension liability.
No, we are not. If we cannot use, if we cannot use hotel tax revenue for this, it's just not going to happen. We're not going to do it. I mean, this is what we've kind of promised that we're relying on to do it. So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
But there's still the question of, can you use hotel?
Exactly.
That's a really important question, I believe.
Yep. And there's differing opinions on that,
Yeah, if you can use, for example, MFT funds, which are devoted for transportation purposes, you can use that for IMRF for those people that are working on those projects. So there is some precedent out there. Like I said, we have two different opinions. I think it's not as clear as either of us would think, and it's probably somewhere in the middle. But we'll see where it goes. So.
Yep.
Attorneys disagree. That's what keeps us in.
As I told him before, billable hours. That's what it's all about. I'm kidding. So it's just know we're pushing for that answer now. I'm going to start to step it up a little bit because we don't want to drag this out past, as soon as possible. We don't want to drag it out past October for sure. So I'm shooting for hopefully spring. We can have some type of indication. Maybe after their primary is done, they might actually have some impetus to move on this. So
and if Jim wants me to join in a letter or something like that, I'll be happy to do it. So
okay. So they're available. I'm available. If you have any questions of me, you want to say your piece. So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Where are we at? We're at about 10:45.
Yes.
Where we're at. So, that being said, I guess I will take a motion to adjourn. No? Mr. Lear? Oh, one thing. The W-2s are upstairs. If you haven't gone to your mailbox, you need to pick them up upstairs. Mr. Lear.
Mr. Chairman, I forgot to mention my UCCI report. They have a special legislative reception scheduled on February 27th. You would have had an email notification of that, and I just wanted to lift that up to the members of this committee. I'll be lifting it up to the full board, inviting anyone that wants to attend either the legislative reception on the 27th or the membership meeting on the 28th.
Okay, thank you. Motion to adjourn? Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Second, Mr. Legess. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All those in favor? Those opposed? Jim was deacon.